For example, this figure shows contiguous habitat patches in the study area. The darkest purple areas are habitat patches of 500 acres and larger. Those are areas where we've grouped all the different kinds of significant habitats together. And this just shows the places where the habitats are least fragmented by roads and other developed uses. The next slide. This was I showed this one earlier. This shows the large forested patches in the dark green colors. And there's one other thing that we do in the report that helps you make some sense of the habitat maps. We've developed what we call conservation zones for certain kinds of habitats. For these, we choose a focal species of conservation concern. In most cases, a species or group of species that we know is rare in the region or in the state or declining. We look at their life history requirements, their ecological requirements, and consider what part of the landscape these species or groups of species need in order to sustain populations in the long term. For example, for an intermittent woodland pool, we chose the group of pool breeding amphibians, such as spotted salamanders and Jefferson salamanders and wood frogs, and looked at the literature on their life history and established what we consider to be a zone around these pools that will accommodate much of their life history needs. These amphibians often travel distances of several hundred feet, even as much as 1,500 feet, 2,500 feet and more from their breeding pools into forested areas where they spend most of the rest of their lives. The forests are every bit as important as the pools themselves for maintaining these populations. So we consider a 750-foot radius from these pools as a kind of minimum conservation zone if you are concerned about maintaining these amphibian populations. These zones are not areas that we expect to be considered, sort of hands-off areas. But we would just recommend that if you are concerned about maintaining pool breeding amphibians, in this case, that you think about their conservation needs if you are thinking about new land uses within these conservation zones. There are ways that you can design new developments and other kinds of new land uses in ways that will minimize harm to the species. And the report that accompanies this map gives lots of recommendations about how to do that. This map shows the conservation zones around kettle shrub pools, which are the typical core habitat for the Blandings turtle. They use large parts of the landscape to, during the warm months, for foraging, for resting, for nesting, and then they usually return to their kettle shrub pools for the winter and spring. But they're very mobile, and they are very vulnerable to hazards in the landscape within which they move. Road mortality, collecting by humans, seems to have done a lot to deplete the turtle populations in this region. We hope and expect that the habitat map will be used in a great variety of ways, both by town agencies and certainly by developers, but also by landowners who are thinking about their management of their own properties. The habitat map will help landowners understand a little more about their own land and how it fits into the larger ecological landscape, understanding how habitats on their land may be interacting with habitats on neighboring properties, and in some cases in areas much farther away. It's quite unusual, actually, to have this much habitat information all in one place. The data in these habitat maps is all original data developed by Hudsonia biologists, and it's not available from any other sources. We're certainly hoping it will be used in a great variety of ways for town-wide planning and site-specific planning for both development and conservation. Some of the other towns that have these habitat maps have used them to revise their comprehensive plans and their zoning ordinances. They've used them to prioritize areas for open space planning. The Dutchess Land Conservancy has used them to help landowners design conservation easements on their own lands. Landowners, of course, have used them for planning their own management of their own lands, whether it's just, where to put in a new shed or a new trail in ways that would minimize harm to the habitats and species that might occur there, or for some larger purpose if there are new development plans. There's all kinds of recommendations in the habitat report about how to use the habitat information, but our basic recommendation is that when you're considering new uses on your own land or on some parcel that's being considered for another kind of development, to first consider which are the priority habitats for conservation, which have been identified in this report. What are the conservation zones that have been identified for that kind of habitat? And what are the management recommendations and conservation recommendations that we've put together here? And then just see if your project can be designed in ways that would accommodate the needs of the sensitive habitats or the species that do occur there or may occur there. That's most of what I wanted to say, but I'm hoping that later on when there are questions, we can say a lot more about some of the things we found here. Just before I wrap up, though, could I just see, I'm assuming most people here are residents of Hyde Park. How many people here are landowners in the town? Just about everyone. That's great. How many people here are landowners of parcels of 5 acres or larger? Quite a few still. That's great. In a little bit, we'll be talking, several of us actually will be talking about conservation measures on that you can employ in your backyard on a day-to-day basis. And so it will be relevant to a great many of you. I think that's all that I need to say right now, and hope to be answering your questions a little later on. Thank you.